Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, and thank you for joining me. Today I'd like to talk a little bit about who do you trust when it comes to information about Panama or what's going on or what to buy and so forth and what have you. To begin with, I think that there's one area that foreigners coming down for the very first time often have the biggest problem with, and that is dealing with, say, real estate agents or others from their own nation speaking in their own language. If they're not Spanish speaking, if they're North American, European, Asian, and they have somebody who speaks their language and comes from their cultural background, they instantly relax and you feel like you're with somebody who understands you and can communicate well with you and so on. And that can be true. There's some really fine expats here who really do a very good job and running all sorts of things from real estate to hotels and restaurants and other activities in the country, and they make a huge contribution. But there are others who are, well, let's put it this way, the worst scams and cons that I've seen in this country, almost all of them have rooted right back into expats, especially in the subject of real estate. And that really upsets me to see that going on. I think you need to keep in mind very much that your own common sense will guide you through this. So whether somebody speaks your language or comes from your country is immaterial. It wouldn't really make any difference to you in your own home nation. Over here, it might be helpful. It makes the conversation a lot easier if you don't speak Spanish. But at the same time, you're talking to a professional. You're talking to somebody whose purpose is to make money. And many of them are very ethical, but there'll be some in there who are not. And so you have to be careful about them. And it brings us back to a very fundamental point, regardless of who you're working with, is that if you actually are going to sign a contract for any reason, to buy, to rent, or whatever, have a lawyer look it over first. You're going to have a lawyer because if you're going to get a visa, you're going to have a lawyer. And you might as well hand it over to him. He can, or she can, go through it in a matter of minutes, because there's fairly standard language, and let you know exactly what it is you're getting yourself into, because that's one of the big mistakes. Now, unfortunately, some of the expat people down here who sell things, they're aware of the fact that you are vulnerable, and they take advantage of it. So if your attitude is, I need to check this out, I need to do my due diligence, I need to have a lawyer take a quick look at this contract, by all means do it, and don't fail to do that just because the person sitting across the table from you just seems like such an awfully nice guy from back home. No, that's not a good reason at all. So that's one thing to keep in mind in terms of trust, is that you don't spend a lot of money. You don't buy something unless you are convinced yourself that it's the right thing for you. And you don't do it out of a sense of connection with the person who's selling it. If you're smart, you just look at it as you would at any other property. Otherwise, you will often hear some terrible stories here or there on the net about how awful Panama is. I can tell you, back years ago when I lived in Bethesda, Maryland, outside Washington, D.C., I had to stay up and work there for a while because that's where my company's offices were, and I was in Panama only on a part-time basis. So while I was up there, knowing I was going to have to spend another year, the apartment that I had rented for several years, was going to be turned into a condo. So the apartment house owner sent us all a message saying that if we had to be out by such and such a date, unless we wanted to buy our own unit, for which they were going to give us a special price. Well, this was nearing the end of the real estate bubble in the U.S., and I was not about to spend that kind of money. It was ridiculous amount of money they wanted for that unit, and I know that wasn't a terribly successful sale project a year later, but at the time, no way would I even consider doing this. So I'm going to have to find another place to rent because I've got to be here for at least another year. And I'd been out before, the first time I'd come into that area to look for a place, and spent a lot of time just going from one place to another, and I thought, well, I'll visit their websites. So I visited their websites, and they all say the right things. And, oh, they're wonderful places and so on. That wasn't helping me too much. I was just going to have to get up and walk out the door and do the rounds. And then I came across a special website which said it was set up for people who had lived in apartments in that area, and they could leave their comments on what it was like to live in each of these apartment houses. All right, that's good. So I went in and took a look at them. In place after place, the comments were so critical. They were really, really unpleasant, ugly even. Occasionally somebody would come out and say, no, that's not the case. I live there and it's fine. And immediately the critics would jump right back in and say, oh no, you're lying. You were paid to say that by the owners. You know this is the worst place in Bethesda, and so on. I said, geez, there's going to be no place for me to buy or rent an apartment? Not if I read this. So I thought, I better look at the apartment house I've been living in for several years. Oh, I've been living in hell and I didn't know it. It was amazing as I read these criticisms about people and practices that absolutely were not my experience at all after several years of living there. People would say, oh, you have something break down in your apartment. It would days and days, even a week or two before anybody would come around to fix it. Well, nonsense. I'd had a couple of problems, and if it was during the office hours, there was somebody there within an hour or two to take care of it. If it was late at night, then the next morning, first thing, somebody would be there to take care of it. People at the front desk were very friendly. I just couldn't have had a nicer crowd of people to work with, but you would have all thought they were the spawn of Satan when you were reading this description about such horrible people in this horrible place. So I did what I had to do, which is just forget it, walk away from it all, and go out and visit all those places. And I found one, so all was well. But it left that mark on me, and I remembered, I've seen this so often in so many places, not just there, and that people who are unhappy shout, and people who are happy get on with their lives. They may come in occasionally and say, this is great, I really like this, but when they get slammed by somebody else saying, oh, you're lying, you're this and that, they just stop. They have better things to do. So the people who are left to comment are the severe critics, and you have to take all that with more than a grain of salt. You have to just set it aside. You need to come down and take your own view. Now, as far as websites are concerned, talking about Panama, the ones that I had the most difficulty with are the ones who play an old game that's been played for decades. They pretend to, in this instance, to know the secrets of Panama, or whatever the secret happens to be. It happens to be this area, which the rich people own this area, and it's been kept off the market for decades. This is actually one of them that I read. And now it was for the first time being released to the public to buy in. It was an exceptional opportunity. You had to jump in right now, and this outfit was going to help you get a property fast down in that particular area. And I read on and on. You know how these things are. If you've ever seen any, you get an email and you go down, you keep looking down, reading, and you get to the end, and they have a link to a web page, and you go there and you go through page after page of exclamation points and capital letters and all sorts of exciting stuff, most of it trivial, that really doesn't have much to say about the area they're talking about. And then at the very end, they mentioned the name of that area. And I just had to laugh. I mentioned it to some other folks here, and everybody laughed. We knew that place. There was no secret involved here. The rich people hadn't been holding on to it because it was so wonderful, and now it wasn't a wonderful time. We called it mosquito heaven here. It was underdeveloped, totally undeveloped, and had just been allowed to really go to seed. The beaches weren't very much to speak of at all. There are a lot of problems with that particular area. Everybody knew it. They just weren't interested in being the ones to go in to spend all the money to try to straighten this place out so it could be presentable. Now, in years following, a group finally has done this. And it's a nicer area now, but it's still not a hot area. And if you'd read that first plug from this particular website, you'd have thought, my Lord, this is a spectacular chance I'm getting the secret inside information. No, you're not. People who live in that country, who deal, in this case real estate, deal in that sector, they know their area. And maybe there are areas that have not been opened that once they open are logically going to be good places to buy. But if so, everybody knows it. It's not a secret. very little is a secret in open societies, and this is certainly an open society here in Panama. You don't keep this sort of thing secret. So when you have that sort of approach, then really you just set it aside. You really can't accept that a group of foreigners in a different country somewhere are convinced that they have such spectacular contacts within a nation, such a knowledge of a nation, that they can come up with these super secrets that aren't secrets at all, that are just meant to suck you in and get you in line to purchase in a place where nobody else really wants to buy and may not want to for a number of years. That always makes me nervous, especially if they talking about it from having inside information nobody else has. That's why I keep pushing the secrets of Panama stuff. It's not secret. I hate to tell you. There are very few secrets. Along with that, there are still a handful of sites out. I keep thinking that this one's going to die a natural death. It's been around for a couple of decades. But it appears that it does still draw some people to websites, so that helps with the advertising, and it also helps with the Secrets of Panama line and so forth or whatever. And that's the comment that the Panama Canal is owned and operated by the Chinese, People's Republic of China. That is absolutely untrue. It's just as simple as that. It's totally untrue. It's not even worth going into any detail. I mean, we've heard their argument, which is, as I say, a couple of decades old, that has to do with a Hong Kong company that is involved, has a contract to operate a couple of the ports here, ignores the Americans who run a couple of ports and others in Taiwan or the other China. A firm from there runs another port. They run ports under contract to the specifications of the government. And that contract is like any other contract. It can be null and void at any time. And they have nothing whatsoever to do with the operation of the canal. That is run by the Panama Canal Authority, which is owned and operated by the Panamanian government on behalf of the Panamanian people. If you read the Constitution of Panama, they have a whole section dedicated just to the canal. And it's mentioned in several other sections as well. It's given quite a bit of independence to enough so it separates it from the normal politics of running a government, which is a good thing because the canal is a highly professional organization and it doesn't need politicians telling it how to run its operation. But it still has to operate within the laws and the Constitution of the country, naturally. But one thing is crystal clear. Just from reading the Constitution, there's no way is this being sold to anybody or handed over to any other nation under any circumstances, period. No politician in his or her right mind would ever suggest doing this here in Panama. They would be destroyed politically instantly. Panamanian people would never put up with it. As I often say to folks who are concerned about this, one of the first embassies that would complain about the People's Republic of China in Beijing running the canal would probably be the Embassy of China, because Panama recognizes the government of the Republic of China in Taiwan, not the People's Republic in Beijing. It's not because we're involved in that political dispute. That's just the way it's been for many years. No one has changed it. Both these nations use the canal. They're both very good clients to the canal. Panama has no interest in getting involved in their political disagreements at all. But that is the embassy that would probably be one of the first to call the government to say, what are you doing? But beyond that, I was a CEO, but of a small company. It was a subsidiary of a larger corporation, been around for 60 years. They were ships brokers and shipping agents, and the whole shipping business. They'd been born and raised in it. These guys were really true professionals from all their decades of work. Our little piece of the action here dealt with logistics over in Africa, a very different set of circumstances. But I can tell you this, that the shipping industry is very well organized. It's huge. Lord knows how many 100,000 people are involved globally in this industry, but it's a lot of people. The folks I worked with, who were the owners of the company, which I was a subsidiary, they knew the Panama Canal. They knew people here. They visited it more than once. Everybody in shipping knows their routes. They know who's in charge of whatever. If this canal here in Panama is ever under the control of any other government or people than the people of Panama and the Panama Canal Authority, a government institution. Everybody in shipping is going to know it. It is going to be a major issue, and everyone's going to take note of it, including the American Embassy and a number of others. It is not true. So I'm not going to go into further detail on it, but when I see this old chestnut come up, and yes, we know the story behind it, it's just ludicrous. Now, I'm going to suggest you go over to pancanal.com. That's PAN canal.com. You can choose either the English or Spanish version, and that's the Canal Authority's website. It has tons of information in there, everything under the sun regarding the canal and how it's operated, and who operates it, and everything else. Under financial information, you'll find the most recent audited statements for last year. Actually, I think for the last decade, you see their audited statements, and also their annual reports are there in English and in Spanish. English is the global language for business, so naturally the canal's business is also done in English. So you can find it in English there as well, of course, as in Spanish. If you do, you know so much more about the canal than 99.9% of the world if you take the time to go through it. But the canal is not owned and operated by anybody other than the government of Panama through the Panama Canal Authority under the strictures, the direction of the Panamanian Constitution. And that is that, pure and simple. So when you run into websites where you find sorts of stories that sound really bizarre, and they're telling you something secret that somehow or other everybody else in the world has missed after all these years, well, frankly, I wouldn't hang out at those sites, because this is just so obvious, and everyone here knows that. And frankly, it's not even worth our time. So normally we don't even talk about it. It's just a few people left with this. But that's the sort of thing I'm talking about now. You have to be cautious of all of that. Your best bet is when you've made up your mind that a country like Panama, wherever it is really of interest to you. The system, the way it's set up, the visas, everything else makes sense to you, and you think it will work for you. Come down. You're going to have to do that anyhow. And then you can make your own judgments. You can talk to people. You can talk to critics. You can talk to enthusiastic supporters. You can talk to expats. You can talk to Panamanians. You can talk to whoever there is out here, because a lot of people are quite willing to talk. You can look for yourself, and you can see the reality, not the secrets, but the real facts that are down here, and get to know the country and get to know how things operate. And your judgment will be a lot better than if you attempt to go on the basis of individuals or websites, and that includes me, Retirement Wave, if that's the site you've seen me at, or whatever. It's not important. I can't judge this country for you. Only you can. So get down here and take a look at it, but don't let the extreme stuff that you hear on the internet, that you see here or there around, overly influence you. It is human behavior. It goes on everywhere in the world. If many of the problems that people talk about here were as horrific as they say, we wouldn't be here. Most of us would have left a long time ago. So just put that aside. Come down with an open mind and take a look. And if you have questions about things that you've read elsewhere, ask people. They'll be able to tell you, and they can assure you the Chinese do not operate the Panama Canal. So thank you very much for listening to me. We'll talk about this from time to time, other things that may pop up that interest people. But I have great confidence in you that you know what's best for you. And I just want to see that you get the opportunity to do that yourself. If I'm helpful, fine. If I'm an obstacle, just ignore me. But the important thing is you get down here and you look and you feel and you sense it for yourself. And you'll find your place. If it's here, you'll find it here. If it isn't here, you'll discover that too. But it will be your discovery, not Bob's or somebody else's or somebody with the deep, dark secrets of Panama. It'll be your story. You are writing your own story. Each of us writes his or her own story. So to write it, you have to come down. Thank you.